I was standing beneath a white arch covered in cream roses waiting for the ceremony to begin when the groom walked up to me like I was a misplaced coat. Not a mother, not a guest of honor, just something someone forgot to put away. He didn't touch me, didn't even look me in the eye, just leaned in stiff as the lapel on his tux and said, "Sarah thinks it's best if you leave. Your presence is upsetting her." I remember the moment precisely not just for what he said, but for how everyone around us pretended not to hear. The servers pouring champagne, the aunt from his side pretending to check her phone. Even the breeze paused like it didn't want to get in the middle of it. I stood there clutching the tiny clutch I'd bought just for today, feeling the weight of my own heartbeat like it was trying to fight its way out of my chest. He didn't wait for me to answer, just turned and walked away. And there she was, my daughter, my Sarah, across the aisle a few paces behind her bridesmaids, beautiful, serene, distant. I caught her eye, or I thought I did, but she didn't flinch, didn't mouth anything. Her veil floated like something holy around her face, and I realized she'd seen it happen, heard what he said, and still, nothing. There was no seat for me in the front row, no corsage, no gesture. Just the soft hum of the string quartet filling the silence where a mother should have been. I walked out slowly, heels sinking into the damp grass, careful not to trip on the uneven path. No one stopped me. Not even the coordinator who knew I'd paid the deposit. Not a soul. Outside the gates, I stood alone in the parking lot. It was August, the kind of heat that clings behind your knees and under your arms, but I was cold. My body trembled not from temperature, but from the kind of humiliation that burns the skin from the inside out. My reflection in the car window looked like someone else. Hair curled just right, eyes painted softly, a dress I couldn't afford but bought anyway because it matched the invitation colors. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there still. The scent of my perfume, a soft rose and sandalwood blend Sarah used to love, lingered in the air. My fingers curled around the steering wheel as I remembered the card she'd sent me a week before the wedding. Just 2 lines. "Thank you for everything, Mom. See you soon." A lie wrapped in calligraphy. I didn't cry. Not then. Not on the drive home. Not when I parked in my driveway and walked through the front door of the house I used to think she'd always return to. My purse dropped on the counter with a heavy thud, and I sat at the kitchen table, the cheap kind with a chipped corner I kept meaning to replace. And I waited like a fool for my phone to buzz, for her to call and say it was a mistake, a misunderstanding that Miles had acted on his own. But the silence stretched hour after hour until the sun slipped below the edge of the sky and left me in darkness. It was then in that heavy dark that I whispered aloud, "She meant it." Not in anger, not even sadness, just fact. I made myself a cup of tea, not because I wanted one, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The kettle screamed. I let it. The cup clinked against the saucer. My fingers trembled. The first sip scalded my tongue. Still, I drank it down. I thought of calling someone, my sister maybe. But how do you say it out loud? My daughter asked me to leave her wedding. I was uninvited publicly like a stranger who wandered in. You can't. Not without sounding pitiful. And that I couldn't bear. So I sat there and stared at the flickering under-cabinet light that always buzzed, thinking how odd it was I'd always dreamed of her wedding day. Not big dreams, nothing grand. Just her hand in mine as we zipped up the dress. A look maybe across the aisle. One moment of being needed. Instead, she needed me gone. And the worst part wasn't even the leaving. It was the way she watched me do it, calm, unmoved, as if I were a shadow slipping across the grass. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when Sarah wouldn't sleep unless her head was tucked beneath my chin and her hand was wrapped around my index finger. She used to call it our starfish hold. Said it made her feel safe, like no monsters could come near her. And I believed her. I believed that love like that, formed early and fiercely, could weather anything. She was 5 when her father left. Walked out on a Wednesday, left his key on the table, and took the Jeep. He said he wasn't made for all this waving a hand like our life was static. I didn't chase him, didn't beg. I just folded his clothes, boxed up his records, and let Sarah sleep with me for a week straight. That's when the world changed. I went from a part-time preschool teacher to cleaning offices at night. I took a second job at a local clinic folding linens. My feet never stopped aching, and some nights I'd wake up with my hands curled so tightly from scrubbing that I couldn't straighten them. But she never knew. I made it invisible, the exhaustion, the unpaid bills, the nights I went without dinner so she could have seconds. Sarah never asked for much. She wasn't that kind of child. Quiet, thoughtful, with a head full of stories. Every time I looked at her, I saw everything I didn't get to become. I didn't resent it. I gave her everything because I wanted to. I needed to. It was like loving her allowed me to rewrite the chapters of my own girlhood, the ones that were missing comfort or safety or belief. When she turned 10, I took her to see the Nutcracker. She clutched my hand so tightly when the curtain rose, I thought my bones might crack. Afterward, she said, "I want to do that, Mommy. I want to fly." So I found a local ballet school. It cost more than our groceries, but I cleaned extra shifts and picked up freelance ironing for a bridal shop. I still remember her in that little pink leotard, her knees always slightly turned in her bun, crooked no matter how tightly I twisted it. She didn't care. She danced like her body belonged to music. And every time she turned and searched for me in the audience, I stood tall, beaming, waving too hard, crying every time. Middle school was tougher. The girls changed. The world got sharper. Sarah came home one day and asked if we could stop shopping at the Goodwill. I didn't flinch. I said sure and spent 3 nights clipping every coupon I could find. I gave up my only vacation day that year to take her to the outlet mall an hour away. She walked out with a hoodie that made her smile for the first time in weeks. That was worth everything. When she started high school, I tried dating again. There was a man, Mark, a mechanic, kind-eyes, decent laugh. He liked me, I think, asked me to dinner more than once. But one night Sarah came into my room while I was getting dressed and just stood there silent. "Do you not want me to go?" I asked. Her lip quivered. She didn't answer. I took off my earrings, called Mark and said I couldn't make it. We never spoke again. I didn't regret it. Not then. I told myself love could wait. That Sarah was the one thing in the world I'd never abandon, never confuse, never break. That she'd know without question that I'd chosen her every time. College came like a storm. She got into Northwestern. Full scholarship. I cried for 3 days, joy, pride, terror. I helped pack her bags, drove her across 3 states, moved her into the dorm myself. I remember standing in that beige-walled room, watching her make her bed, thinking how grown she looked. How far from me. She hugged me lightly, a pat more than an embrace. "I'll call tonight," she said. She didn't. Not that night. Not the next. Weeks passed. Our talks grew shorter. Her world swelled with new people, new classes, new versions of herself. When she came home that first Christmas, she brought a boy. Miles, button-down shirt, perfect teeth. Called me ma'am. The kind of man who'd been to finishing school dinners and wore cologne that smelled like privilege. He was polite, distant. I asked what his major was, and he replied finance. But I'm pivoting toward venture capital. I remember nodding like I understood, like any of it made sense, but mostly I remember how Sarah looked at him, like he was a mirror reflecting a future she didn't think I belonged in. The girl who used to beg me to braid her hair now corrected my pronunciation. It's croissant, not crescent roll, she laughed, her tone light but sharp. She wasn't cruel, just edited, polished. I'd never seen her tuck herself in so tightly, and I didn't know how to reach her. After they left that weekend, I stood in the kitchen staring at the empty pie tin. I'd made her favorite brown sugar pecan, and not one slice had been touched. I wrapped it in foil anyway, placed it carefully in the fridge. Maybe for tomorrow, maybe for never. It wasn't a single moment that told me I'd lost her. No slamming door, no shouted words. Just 1,000 soft closures over time. Polite texts instead of phone calls. An RSVP that said, regretfully can't attend to my 60th birthday dinner, followed by an Instagram photo of her and Miles at a vineyard smiling in sun hats. The small hurts that don't break you all at once, but slowly replace your heart with stone. She used to call me every Sunday. Then it became once a month. Then only when she needed something, measurements from the house insurance details recipes she couldn't quite remember. The warmth drained from her voice like someone was squeezing it out. She'd laugh at something Miles said in the background, forget I was even on the line. Still, I never confronted her. I kept waiting for it to swing back like a pendulum. I told myself she was busy, building her life, growing into her own. I even took the blame in quiet ways. Maybe I hadn't prepared her well enough. Maybe I loved her too tightly, smothered her with all the things I didn't have. Maybe it was my fault she didn't want to come home anymore. The Christmas before the wedding, I hosted dinner. I spent 2 days cooking, cleaned every inch of the house, dug out the old stockings even though no one had hung them in years. When she walked in, she hugged me with one arm. A dry cheek press, the kind people give strangers at funerals. She looked around like a real estate agent, eyes scanning the room for flaws. Still have the same couch, she asked, like it was a punchline. Miles handed me a bottle of wine, something French, something expensive, and asked if we had a decanter. I didn't know what that was. I told him the glasses were in the cabinet. He smiled with his mouth, not his eyes. During dinner, Sarah barely ate, picked at the roast, complimented the cranberry sauce which I'd bought pre-made that year, too tired to do everything. Afterward, she and Miles went out to visit a friend and didn't return until nearly midnight. I waited up. She looked surprised to find me still awake. You didn't have to wait, she said. But I did. I always did. When they got engaged, she told me over text. A blurry photo of her hand, the diamond ring sparkling against her knuckle. No voice message. No squeal of joy. Just, he proposed. I stared at it for a full minute before typing, congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you. She responded with a heart emoji. A week later, she called and asked if I'd be willing to help with the venue. It's the only place we really love, she said. But the deposit's due next week, and Miles's parents are covering the honeymoon, so I didn't hesitate. I said yes. What she didn't know, what I'd never tell her, was that the money came from the envelope I'd been quietly saving for 15 years. I'd started it when she got into college. A few dollars from every paycheck, a little extra from the holidays. It was supposed to be for travel, for something new just for me. But in the end, it went to her, like everything else. She didn't offer to repay me, and I didn't ask. The only thank you I received came in the form of a forwarded confirmation email from the venue. My name was on the contract. My address listed as the contact point, but the email signature was hers, Sarah Davis, bride-to-be. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the turning point. That we'd have moments again, dress fittings, cake tastings, the softness that used to live between us when we planned things together. But I was wrong. She kept me at arm's length throughout the planning, said the dress boutique was too far for me to travel to, that her college friends were hosting the bridal shower, that Miles's mother had aesthetic ideas for the ceremony. Every call I made was met with, "I'll check with the planner," or "We've got it covered." Still, I held on. I ordered a mother of the bride dress and had it tailored to fit just right. I sent her a locket with a photo of us from her second grade recital inside. I even called her the night before the wedding just to say I loved her. She didn't answer. Sent a text. "Can't talk now. Big day tomorrow. Love you too, but love doesn't look like silence. Not when it matters most." That morning I arrived early at the venue. The sky was painted in the softest blues, the air heavy with flowers and promise. I wore my best heels, curled my hair the way she liked. I even brought a handkerchief embroidered with her initials, a gift I never got to give. The venue coordinator recognized me immediately. "Oh, Mrs. Davis, so glad to see you," she said, placing a hand on my arm. "Everything's on schedule." I looked around. The place was perfect. It really was. Ivy winding around white trellises, rows of chairs in delicate cream, musicians setting up under a silk tent. It could have been a dream. And in that moment, I allowed myself to feel it, the flicker of pride, of joy, of motherly awe, until Miles found me and told me to leave. And all of it, the years, the sacrifices, the silences I'd swallowed, collapsed into that moment of rejection. The worst part wasn't his voice. It wasn't the way he didn't thank me. It wasn't even the disgust in his tone. It was the fact that I looked at my daughter and saw that she agreed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with my dress still on the zipper, half undone, like if I moved too much, the whole thing would split down the middle. My feet ached, but I couldn't bring myself to take off the shoes. I just stared at the ceiling and watched the shadows crawl across the plaster. The phone never rang. Not even a text. Not even an apology disguised as explanation. Sometime before dawn, I went to the kitchen and sat with a notebook. I wanted to write something. A letter. A memory. Something that would make it real, because my mind kept stuttering, like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it hadn't happened that way. Maybe he hadn't said those words. But I couldn't write. My hand wouldn't move. What I could do was open my email. The confirmation from the venue was still there. The contract, the invoice. My name in bold at the top because I was the one who had paid the deposit. Not Miles, not his parents. Me, the woman who had cleaned urinals and folded napkins in a catering hall for 10 years just to squirrel away enough to matter. I read every line of that contract, twice, and then I saw it. The remaining balance due on the day of the event. A second payment that hadn't yet cleared because the venue had agreed to charge it on the morning of the wedding under a deferred agreement. The credit card on file mine. My hand trembled as I opened my banking app. It was there. A pending charge, the full remaining balance. Thousands. They hadn't even told me. Just assumed. That was the moment. The shift. Not the ceremony. Not the humiliation, but that quiet violation of trust, the final silent transaction where I was expected to pay for the privilege of being discarded. I called the venue that morning, told them I wanted to cancel the pending charge and freeze any remaining funds. The coordinator stammered, apologized, said it was standard. I reminded her the contract was in my name, that no authorization for the second payment had been signed, that the bride and groom had asked me to leave the event, that I hadn't even stayed for a glass of water. She paused. And then she said, "I understand. We'll halt the transaction immediately and send a revised invoice." She didn't sound surprised. I ended the call and sat in the stillness of my kitchen, the morning light bleeding in through the curtains like it was trying to decide if I deserved softness or not. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was a boundary. I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't need to. She found out 3 days later. I was folding laundry when the call came in, her name flashing on my phone after 5 full days of silence. I hesitated before answering. Part of me still wanted to hear her voice, the version of her that used to sing in the car with me, that used to call just to say, "Guess what happened today?" But the voice I heard was sharp, measured. A stranger in my daughter's skin. "Did you cancel the venue payment?" she asked. No greeting, no pause. I didn't raise my voice. I froze it. I hadn't authorized the charge. You knew we were counting on that. You told me to leave. Silence. Just breathing on the line. I didn't... She began but stopped herself. It was Miles's idea. He thought he said you were making things uncomfortable. I stood there quietly. She didn't reply. I paid the deposit, Sarah. I was the contract holder. You knew that. Another pause. Then quieter. He thought you were going to make a scene. That stung more than anything else she'd said. Have I ever done that? Once. No, she admitted. But it didn't sound like an apology. Just an inconvenience. We had to borrow the rest from his parents, she added, as if that justified everything. I hope the day was beautiful, I said, and I meant it. God help me, I did. She didn't respond, just hung up. 2 days later, I received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a receipt for a refund of a portion of the deposit. Not the whole thing, just the portion that wasn't spent. A note scribbled on the back in handwriting I didn't recognize. You made your point. That was the last I heard from them for months. And for the first time in years, I didn't chase her down. I didn't call to apologize for something I didn't do. I didn't send birthday gifts or holiday cards. I let the silence stretch like a fresh sheet, clean and cool, pulled over something that had died. The quiet after her wedding was thick. Not peaceful, not yet. Just heavy like a room after someone's walked out and left the door open behind them. I didn't fill it. I didn't try. I didn't rush to patch the gap between us with cheerful texts or sugar-coated excuses. I sat in it, ate my dinners in silence, folded towels with the radio off, let the ache bloom fully so I could finally name it. It was grief, not over her happiness, but over the version of her I'd loved for so long. That little girl who once made birthday cards out of cereal boxes and string, who kissed my hand after every scraped knee, who used to say, "Don't go to sleep yet. Just sit with me." That girl was gone. Or maybe she'd just outgrown the need for me. But if that was true, if she had evolved into someone I could no longer recognize, then I had to allow myself to do the same. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because every day I kept chasing the past, I was leaving myself behind. The first thing I did was cancel the catering order I'd made for her post-honeymoon brunch. She hadn't asked for it, of course, but I'd ordered it anyway, like I always did, anticipating her needs before she had to name them. I'd picked her favorite lemon ricotta pancakes, arugula salad, peach bellinis. It was a local shop, easy to cancel. The man on the phone was kind when I explained. I think my voice cracked somewhere between, "My daughter got married last week and turns out they don't need me." The second thing I did was open the closet in the guest room, the one where I kept boxes of her childhood art notebooks, cards she'd made, the first point shoes she ever wore, bent and scuffed, still dusty with powdered resin. I didn't throw anything out, but I moved the boxes to the attic, let the room breathe again, like maybe someone else might sit there someday. Not her, not anymore. A week later, I found myself driving past the community center, the one with the pottery classes I used to eye from the parking lot. I parked, walked in, signed up. They handed me a beginner's kit, clay wire tools, a sponge and a half apron that tied crooked across my back. The first time I sat at the wheel, I felt ridiculous. My hands trembled. The clay slipped through my fingers like wet bread. But I didn't care. It was the first thing I'd done in a long time that was just for me. Just mine. I started going every Thursday. I liked the feel of the clay cooling my hands, the way something formless could be shaped into anything, bowl, vase, broken heart. My first piece collapsed on itself. My second cracked in the kiln. My third sat lopsided on my mantle for months. I called it Sarah not because it looked like her, but because it didn't. Because it was unfinished and oddly shaped and still worth keeping. That spring I planted a garden. Nothing big, just a few herbs, a patch of wildflowers, some tomatoes that never quite ripened right. I spent hours there, pulling weeds, adjusting the trellis, talking to myself in the soft way people do when no one's listening. I don't think I smiled much yet, but I felt my spine start to straighten. Around mid-June, I got a message from her. An email. Subject line, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time before opening it. No greeting. No apology. Just 3 lines. Miles and I are moving. I wanted you to hear it from me. I hope you're okay. That was it. No mention of the wedding. No acknowledgement of the months between us, thick with all the things she'd never said. I didn't reply. Not right away. I closed my laptop and stood by the window, watching the rain begin to spatter against the sill. The smell of soil and honeysuckle crept in through the open screen. I brewed tea, sat with it. Then I wrote back. "I'm glad you're starting your life. I'm still here tending to mine. Be well." I didn't sign it, "Love, Mom." I didn't sign it at all. That was the first time I'd ever chosen distance without guilt, and it felt steady, not triumphant, not cold, just steady. A week later, a package arrived. No note, just a small envelope with my name on it, and inside the locket I'd tried to give her on her wedding day. The one with the photo of us at her recital, our cheeks pressed together, both of us grinning like we had forever ahead of us. The chain was broken, snapped maybe accidentally, maybe not. I placed it in my jewelry drawer without comment. It stayed there. The following Sunday, I clipped roses from my garden. Not because anyone was visiting, but because I wanted the scent in my kitchen. I set them in a glass vase next to my lopsided pottery. Then I sat down alone and made myself breakfast. 1 egg, toast, fresh strawberries, and for the first time in months, I ate every bite. I used to think motherhood was permanent. Not just the role, but the closeness. the stitching between two people who'd once shared a body. I believed that no matter how far she wandered, she'd always snap back toward me like a tide-like breath. I didn't realize that sometimes love doesn't disappear. It just becomes quiet, a dull ache instead of a pulse, a memory instead of a conversation. It's strange how a life rearranges itself when you stop waiting for someone to come home. The summer passed slowly, the heat baked into the walls of the house, curling the edges of old photographs. I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning, stopped making 2 cups of tea out of habit. The extra chair at the table no longer made me ache. It just became part of the room again. Then in early August, the venue coordinator called me. She sounded nervous, said she was just following up on some final accounting related to the event since the original contract had been under my name. I paused, surprised. I thought it had all been settled. The partial refund, the frozen balance? I hadn't expected more. We ran an internal audit, she explained, and discovered a few vendor overcharges that were later adjusted. You're actually entitled to a remaining balance, $1,750. Would you like that refunded to your card or sent by check? I blinked. That amount could have covered my heating bill for the winter, or new tires, or a dozen small indulgences I'd never allowed myself. By check, I said finally. Thank you. The envelope arrived 4 days later. A plain white square with no sentiment, no embellishment. Just a check made out to me and the attached invoice detailing the adjustments. As I slid the paper from the envelope, a thought struck me. I had paid for a dream I was never invited to live in, but somehow I had come out of it with more than I expected. I placed the check in a drawer next to the broken locket. Let them keep each other company. Later that week, I went to the bank, not just to deposit the funds, but to open a new account, one with my name and no one else's. I asked the teller to print a label for it, Future Joys. A small thing, silly maybe, but it mattered to me. I didn't want to live in bitterness. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way that scorches. I was something else now. Stripped bare. Clean. Like winter trees, not dead, but waiting. In September, I got a postcard from them. Sarah and Miles. A photo of them in Santorini smiling over a whitewashed balcony. Her hair was lighter. Her skin sun-kissed his arm wrapped around her shoulders like a claim. On the back, just a single line in her handwriting. Thinking of you. Hope you're doing well. I held it in my hand for a long time. Not because it stirred hope, but because it didn't. Because I read it and didn't cry. Because her words felt like a stranger had written them, soft and distant, touched with a guilt she couldn't say aloud. And I no longer needed her to. I placed the postcard in a drawer with the others, a small archive of almosts. By October, the garden was quiet, the roses gone, the soil hardening beneath the cold. But the mint had survived, stubborn, fragrant, soft at the edges. I clipped a few sprigs, crushed them between my palms, inhaled the clean scent. Some things grow even when they're not tended to. One night I pulled out an old photo album. Not digital, real paper pages. Glossy prints from birthdays, field trips, messy first day of school hair. There we were, sticky fingers and smiles, 2 big knees with bruises, eyes full of future. I traced her face in one photo, Sarah at 12, grinning beside a homemade cake. I looked younger then, tired and joyful, the 2 states braided together like they always had been. I hope you're happy, I whispered. Not a curse, not a plea, just a benediction. I closed the album. The next day, I signed up for a weekend retreat pottery and journaling in a cottage 2 hours north. I didn't ask anyone for permission, didn't worry if someone would need me. For the first time, no one did. I packed a small bag, left a note for the mailman to hold deliveries, took my check from the drawer and used it to pay the balance. The road out of town was lined with gold trees turning just at the edge of fall, their leaves loosening, letting go without fanfare. The sky opened in front of me like something I hadn't dared to imagine, and I drove forward, not away, not from her, from the woman I'd been bent around someone else's absence, waiting for a return that never came. I wasn't waiting anymore. The cottage sat at the edge of a lake so still it looked like glass. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a postcard, a soft, worn dock stretching into quiet water, wooden steps dusted with pine needles, wind chimes that sang only when they felt like it. I arrived just before dusk, the sky turning lavender, my hands tight on the steering wheel, even though I was already parked. I sat for a few minutes in the car before going in. There was no one waiting inside, no one to greet me, just a small hand-lettered sign on the cabin door. "Welcome, Eleanor. Come rest." My name. No mom. No title. Just me. Inside it smelled of cedar and chamomile. There was a fireplace already laid with kindling, a little kitchen with 2 mugs, a folded quilt on the bed that reminded me of the one I used to wrap around Sarah after her nightmares, the pink one with the stars she'd eventually said was too babyish. I ran my hand across the stitching and let the memory come. I didn't fight it this time. That first night I didn't do much. Just drank tea and sat on the front steps wrapped in a sweater watching the water shift with the wind. The silence here was different than at home. It wasn't lonely. It was full. The next morning I joined the other 6 women, all in their 50s and 60s, with quiet hands and loud eyes. We made introductions over fresh bread and black coffee. No one asked what we did, only what we'd come to let go of. We took turns at the pottery wheels. We journaled in silence under oak trees. We made soup together in the evenings, chopping vegetables like it was a sacrament. I didn't talk much, didn't need to. I listened, and slowly the ache in my chest began to loosen like fingers unclenching. On the 3rd night, one of the women, her name was Janine, sat beside me on the porch. "Do you have children?" she asked. It was such a simple question, such an old, familiar shape. I took a breath before answering. "I did," I said. "I do." "She's grown." Janine nodded, didn't pry, just sipped her wine and stared at the stars. And that somehow was the greatest kindness. No follow-up, no fix, just space. The retreat ended on a Sunday. I left before dawn, packed my things, folded the quilt, and left a note for the owner. "Thank you for reminding me what stillness feels like." The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio, just let the morning fog curl around the car, let the silence travel with me. When I arrived, the house smelled faintly of dust and something else, my life, I suppose, my particular loneliness. But it didn't feel quite so heavy now. It just felt lived in. That afternoon, I pulled out a new notebook. Not for Sarah, not for anyone, just for me. I started writing small things, not stories, not poems, just truths. I am still here. I do not owe anyone my ruin. I am not a failed mother. I am a whole person. I wrote those words slowly, my hand steady. Then I closed the notebook and made myself dinner, not eggs this time, but salmon and asparagus with a squeeze of lemon. I poured a glass of wine. I lit a candle. I sat at the table like I was expecting someone wonderful. The next morning, I went outside and cut back the roses. The summer bloom had faded and the stalks were dry, but the mint was thriving. The lavender, too. I trimmed them gently, placed them in a vase by the window. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the beach. I wore my old bathing suit, the one with the faded navy stripes. Brought a towel, a sandwich, and a paperback novel with yellowing pages. I sat by the water watching children dig holes and couples walk dogs. No one knew me. No one cared. And I loved it. When the sun began to dip low, I stood at the shoreline and let the cold water curl around my ankles. I closed my eyes, felt the tug of the tide, the sound of seagulls overhead, the salt drying on my skin, and then I smiled small private, just for me. Not because I'd moved on, but because I is moving. Still in motion, still alive. That night, as I dried off and crawled into bed, I noticed the voicemail icon on my phone. One new message. From Sarah. Her voice was soft. Careful. Hi, Mom. I wanted to say I'm sorry. About how everything happened. About the wedding. About all of it. There was a pause. Then I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if you want to. But I've been thinking about you. A lot. I'm pregnant. It's early. We haven't told anyone. But I wanted you to know. I guess because you're still my mom. She hesitated. I hope you're okay. Click. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the echo of her voice in the dark. Pregnant. I thought I would feel something enormous, joy, pain, longing, but what I felt instead was stillness. Not numb, not cold, just a quiet recognition of where we stood. She hadn't said she missed me. She'd said she was thinking of me, and I suppose that was something. I didn't call her back, not right away. I let the message live in my phone for 3 days untouched, not because I was punishing her, not because I didn't care, but because I needed to understand what I felt before I gave it shape. I needed to stand still in the wake of her voice and feel where it landed in me. She was going to be a mother. And something about that felt like a tide shifting, not in our relationship, but in time itself. Like I had crossed an invisible border and now stood on the other side of some long, painful history. The night after her message, I sat in my kitchen with a pen in hand and wrote a letter I never planned to send, just to hear my own voice again, uninterrupted. Sarah. You are the first person I ever truly loved. Not in pieces, not conditionally, fully. And the hardest thing I've ever done was to realize that love doesn't guarantee closeness. I wanted so much for you, joy, freedom, safety. I thought I could give you all of it if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed deeply enough. But I see now that I didn't raise you to need me forever. I raised you to stand apart, and maybe you've taken that too far. Maybe I let you, but I'm tired of holding the rope alone. I wish you softness in this new chapter. I hope you find your own way. I'll be here, not waiting, not begging, just here. Mom. When I finished it, I folded the page in half and placed it in the back of my journal. It didn't need to be sent. It had done its work. I spent the rest of the week like I usually did, pottery on Thursday, coffee with a neighbor on Friday, a trip to the library on Saturday morning. I stopped reading parenting books. I stopped imagining reconciliation like a finish line. I didn't need a reunion. I needed clarity. and I was finding it slowly like shards of something whole buried under years of noise. Sunday morning, I woke to an email from Miles. Just his name in the sender line made my stomach harden. The subject, a request. The message, Eleanor. I understand. There's been distance between you and Sarah. I take full responsibility for how the wedding unfolded. I made decisions I thought were best in the moment. They were not. Sarah is struggling. I'm reaching out because I believe your presence could help. She won't say it, but I think she misses you. She's in her second trimester. The pregnancy has been difficult physically, emotionally. I know you may not want to re-enter this chapter with us, but I wanted to ask on her behalf if you would consider visiting. We're not asking for forgiveness. Just grace. Miles. I sat with it for a long time. Read it twice. 3 times, I thought about how he looked at me that day in the garden, tight-lipped, authoritative, like I was a problem to be handled. And now here he was, not groveling but reaching, asking for a mercy I hadn't known they could see. I didn't reply. Not that day. I needed to feel my way through it without impulse. That evening I went for a walk through the neighborhood past the little brick houses and creaky porches, past the old oak tree where I'd once lifted Sarah high into the branches while she squealed with delight. I paused there, listened to the wind move through the leaves, felt the weight of time settle gently across my shoulders. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel warm either. I just felt steady. 2 days later, I wrote back, Miles. Thank you for your message. I'm not sure what my presence would bring her right now, but I will think on it. Please take care of her. Eleanor. No more, no less. 2 weeks passed, then 3. No reply. And that was fine. I didn't need one. I was living in a different rhythm now, not reactive, not defined by what she gave or didn't give. I started volunteering at the shelter down the road, feeding stray cats, organizing supplies. I baked more, took long baths without thinking of who might call. I filled my home with scents I liked: rosemary, lemon balm, old books. One night in early November, I came home to find a package at my doorstep. No sender listed, just a plain white box with my name on the label. Inside, a soft gray baby blanket hand-knitted. My pattern, one I'd taught Sarah years ago. Tucked beneath it, a card. I'm sorry it took so long. I still remember your hands teaching mine. S. No apology for the wedding, no mention of the day I'd been asked to leave. But it didn't feel empty. It felt like a door left cracked open. I didn't rush through it. I didn't call her. I didn't write a note. I just folded the blanket gently, brought it to my chest, and let myself cry. Not out of grief, not out of joy, just release. The ache of everything we'd lost and everything we might not have the words to rebuild flowed through me like rain through cracked earth. And I let it. The first frost came early that year. I remember it because the mint in my garden finally gave up the leaves, browned overnight, curled inward like small fists. I stood at the window with my morning tea and watched the breath of winter settle over everything I had tended. Nothing lasts forever. Even the stubborn things learn when to let go. That blanket stayed folded on my kitchen table for days. I couldn't bring myself to move it. Every time I passed it, I brushed my fingers across the yarn, slow and reverent. It wasn't just a gift. It was a confession, the only kind she knew how to make. Not in words, not yet, but in a language I understood better than either of us knew time, effort, the softness of a pattern passed between generations. I didn't tell anyone about the blanket. I didn't need to. It felt private, like something sacred fragile. The silence between us hadn't been broken, but it had thinned like ice in spring, not yet cracked but trembling underfoot. One Saturday morning just after Thanksgiving, I opened my front door to find a woman standing there. Brown hair, tired eyes, a coat that hung open over a belly she was no longer trying to hide. Sarah. I didn't speak. Not right away. She didn't either. We just stared at each other, the wind pushing softly at her back like it was urging her inside. I was in the neighborhood, she said. Her voice was hoarse, as if she'd practiced it and still didn't believe it. You live 2 hours away, I replied, not unkindly. She let out a breath. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sob. I didn't know where else to go, she whispered. I opened the door wider. Come in, I said. It's cold. She stepped inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and lemon oil I'd been baking earlier, something I didn't do often anymore. She looked around like she was stepping into a memory. Her eyes lingered on the photos, the same couch, the chipped corner of the table. It's all the same, she said. It is. She stood in the middle of the living room, one hand resting on her stomach, the other dangling uselessly by her side. I watched her try to settle her weight, not just the baby, but the years between us. I didn't come here to fix everything, she said. I don't even know if that's possible. I sat down in my usual chair, nodded for her to take the couch. She did carefully, her movement slower now. She looked tired, hollow, in a way I recognized. I just keep thinking about when I was little, she said. When I used to wake up scared and climb into your bed, and you'd hold me like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing, I said. It was everything. Her lip quivered, but she didn't cry. Sometimes I think about that version of me, she said. The one who used to reach for you without thinking. I don't know where she went. She's still there, I said, but she's not the only version of you that matters. She was quiet a long time. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. I wrote you something, she said. It's not enough, but it's honest. I took it. Didn't open it. We sat like that in the soft hush of afternoon, the light stretching thin across the rug. I made us tea because it was something to do with my hands. She held hers in her lap, didn't drink it, just let the steam warm her face. I'm scared, she admitted. Of being a mother. She nodded. What if I mess it up? I didn't answer right away. You will, I said finally. We all do. But if you show up, if you keep showing up, that's what lasts. She looked down at her stomach. I haven't been a good daughter. I let the words settle. Let her sit in them. No, I said. But I wasn't asking you to be. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw her, not the bride who'd looked through me, not the stranger who sent wine and distant notes, but my daughter, my child. Still in there, tired, raw, and reaching. I don't know how to make this right, she said. You start by sitting down, I said. And staying? She stayed for 2 hours. We didn't talk about the wedding. We didn't talk about Miles. We didn't need to. We just peeled apples and made a pie together like we used to. She rubbed her back halfway through, and I handed her a kitchen stool. She sat. I added cinnamon. She smiled when the first smell hit the air. She left just before dusk. hugged me tighter than she had in years, her chin on my shoulder, her breath catching for just a second. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "That's not what love is about," I said. She pulled back, nodded, and walked to her car. When the door shut behind her, I stood for a long time in the fading light. Then I sat down, opened the envelope, and read her letter. It wasn't long. "Mom, I was unkind. I was ungrateful. And worst of all, I forgot that love doesn't come from perfection. It comes from presence. And you were always there. I'm sorry I made you feel like that wasn't enough. I know I may never earn back your trust, but I hope I can earn your presence. Love, Sarah." My hands trembled as I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. Not because it fixed everything, but because it didn't try to. Winter settled in slow that year, the kind that doesn't come with snowstorms or sudden drops, just a deepening gray like the world itself was exhaling. I kept her letter in the top drawer of my nightstand. I didn't read it again. I didn't need to. It had done its work the way an old lullaby settles into your bones long after the music fades. We didn't speak for a few weeks after her visit. But something had shifted. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was simply space. Not absence, not rejection. Just air between two people learning how to stand side by side again. Then on a Tuesday morning, she texted me, "Can you come with me to my next appointment?" 5 words, that's all. I sat with the message for almost an hour before I replied. Yes. No punctuation, no questions, just a yes. The clinic was 1 town over. I arrived early and stood in the parking lot watching the cars glide in and out. When she arrived, she was wearing the scarf I'd knitted her in college, the one she used to call itchy but home. She didn't hug me, just linked her arm with mine and said, "Let's go." The ultrasound room was too bright. The paper on the table crinkled when she lay down. I sat beside her, hands folded in my lap, unsure if I was allowed to touch her. But when the technician started the machine, Sarah reached for me. Her fingers were cold. Or maybe mine were. And then the sound came fast, rhythmic, impossibly small. The baby's heartbeat. She turned to me, eyes wide, and whispered, "I didn't know it would sound like that." Neither did I. It reminded me of her years ago, when she was small enough to fit across my chest. The same wild flutter, the same fragile certainty. After the appointment, we sat in my car. Neither of us moved to start the engine. "I'm scared I won't know what to do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that I'll mess her up. Her. A granddaughter." I swallowed hard. "You will mess up," I said. "We all do." She laughed. "A real one, tired and honest. But you'll also love her. Show up. Stay. That's what counts." She stared out the window for a while. "You made it look so easy." It wasn't. I know, she said quietly. We didn't talk much after that. But she started calling again. Once a week. Just to ask about recipes or baby names or what kinds of bottles to buy. Her voice still held a tightness, like she was afraid I might disappear if she said the wrong thing, but she kept reaching. And I kept answering. In January, she brought over a bin of baby clothes for me to help sort. We spent the afternoon folding tiny onesies and laughing over how many shades of pink there were in the world. At one point, she held up a frilly dress and made a face. "If she ever tries to wear a tutu to the grocery store, I'm blaming you." I smiled. "You wore one until you were 6. "I did not. There are pictures." She groaned, dramatic, and I handed her a cookie. After she left, I found one of the booties she'd dropped. I held it for a long time. Such a small thing, and yet it felt like the weight of an entire second chance. We never revisited the wedding. Not directly. It stayed like a scar between us, healed over but tender if pressed. And that was okay. Not everything needed to be dissected. Some wounds just needed time breath and the quiet agreement not to pick at them anymore. Then one Sunday evening in March, she showed up again. No call, no warning. Just a knock at the door, soft and tentative. When I opened it, she was crying. "I think I'm in labor," she said. "Miles is stuck in traffic." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat, my bag, my keys. We drove fast but careful, her breathing sharp in the passenger seat, hands clenching the armrest. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other reaching for hers when I could. "It hurts," she whispered. "I know," I said. "But you're doing it." She was admitted quickly. I stayed beside her, brushing the damp hair from her forehead, timing the contractions, whispering old lullabies without even realizing it. At one point, she looked at me and said, "Don't leave." And I didn't. I stayed through every push, every scream, every moment her eyes begged for something to hold onto. And when the baby finally arrived, red-faced and slippery and wailing, I watched my daughter become someone else. Not just a mother, but a mirror. She looked at me then, her face flushed and raw and shining with tears. "Her name is Grace," she said, and I understood. It wasn't a tribute. It was a reckoning, a word that held everything we'd lost and everything we'd managed to carry anyway. Grace. They let me hold her. That little girl, my granddaughter, curled into my arms like she'd been waiting for me too. And I cried. Not for what was lost, but for what against all odds had found its way home. They say a baby changes everything. I used to scoff at that thought. It was the kind of line people repeated when they didn't know what else to say. But standing in Sarah's living room 2 weeks after Grace was born, watching her tiny chest rise and fall against my daughter's shoulder, I finally understood. It wasn't just a change, it was a resurrection. The house smelled like lavender and breast milk in new beginnings. It was quiet, but not with the cold, distant hush of our years apart. It was the quiet of sleep-deprived peace of lullabies, half-hummed of 2 women learning how to be soft with each other again. I came by in the morning, sometimes unannounced, sometimes invited. I'd bring breakfast banana muffins, hard-boiled eggs, a thermos of strong coffee. Sarah always looked exhausted, her hair piled in a messy knot, the neckline of her t-shirt pulled loose from feeding. And still she was radiant in the way only new mothers are, all cracked open and barely holding together, and somehow more beautiful because of it. She let me hold Grace without hesitation now. She'd place her gently in my arms and go collapse on the couch or slide into a hot shower while I rocked the baby in the creaky old glider she'd once begged me to throw away. The same one that had rocked her to sleep 1,000 nights. She didn't mention that anymore. She just sat in it without irony, as if she had always known it would come back to her. Grace was fussy those first few weeks. Colic, they said. I called it defiance. Even at 3 a.m., she had lungs like a cathedral bell. But Sarah never complained. She just paced the floors, bouncing her gently whispering nonsense with patience I hadn't known she had. One night I stayed over to help. Sarah looked like a ghost version of herself, pale, bone-tired, emotionally threadbare. She handed me Grace without a word and went into the bathroom. I heard the water run, heard her sit, and then I heard the crying. Not the baby. Sarah. She didn't wail, didn't scream, just wept quiet and steady, the sound of someone unraveling in private. I didn't go in. I stayed in the rocker humming softly to Grace, my heart breaking open in a way it hadn't in years. When Sarah came out 20 minutes later, eyes red, hands shaking, she looked at me and said, "I don't know if I'm doing this right." And I said, "None of us do." She sank to the floor, rested her head against my knee like she used to when she was sick as a child. Grace slept between us. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. I didn't need to ask for what. I know I said, there are some things apology can't reach, but presence can. That night we sat on the floor until the sun came up, passing the baby back and forth like she was both balm and truth. The next week, Sarah framed a photo of the three of us, me, her, and Grace. She placed it on the mantel next to their wedding photo. She didn't say anything. Just did it. I noticed. And that was the thing about our reconciliation. It didn't happen all at once. It came in inches. In silence, held instead of filled. In doors opened slowly. In the unspoken agreement to let the past lie where it fell. One day, while folding Grace's tiny clothes, Sarah looked at me and said, "Do you ever think we could have avoided all of it?" The distance. The hurt. I paused before answering. "No," I said. "I think it had to happen." "Why?" "Because we both needed to unlearn some things. I needed to stop believing I was only valuable if I was needed, and you needed to figure out who you were without me standing over your shoulder." She didn't argue. She just nodded. That spring, I moved to a smaller place 10 minutes from their home. Nothing fancy. Just enough for me. A small kitchen. A tiny sunroom where I could keep my plants. A guest room with a crib in the corner just in case. Sarah helped me paint the nursery walls, pale yellow. Grace squealed in her little bouncer on the floor while we worked. We didn't talk about the wedding. I still don't know if she remembers the exact way that day unfolded, if she recalls the way her groom asked me to leave, if she ever thinks about the moment our bond broke in front of linen-draped chairs and catered hors d'oeuvres. Maybe she does. Maybe she avoids it. Maybe she thinks the return of my presence means the wound was never real, but I know better, and I don't need to remind her, because some things don't need to be spoken to be felt. And in her gaze, gentler, now stripped of pride, I feel it every time. There are still days I retreat, when I see an old photo or pass the bridal section of a department store or smell the perfume I wore that day. I don't linger. I don't punish myself. I just keep moving. I have new roles now, not just mother, not just grandmother, but woman, whole, scarred and still standing. Grace is crawling now. She has Sarah's eyes, my mouth, Miles's dimple. And when she laughs, it's the kind of sound that makes the world a little softer. Sometimes I hold her and whisper stories into her ear, not the ones we write down, but the ones that live in our bones, stories of women who loved too much, who gave until they disappeared, and who came back. Not perfect, not applauded, but whole. The day Grace said Nana for the first time, I was pulling her socks out of the dryer. Sarah was on the floor sorting toys, her back turned, and from the center of the rug, this little voice rose small, bright, certain. "Nana." I froze one sock still in my hand. Sarah turned slowly, her mouth parted in disbelief. She said I heard her. Grace said it again as if she'd been storing it, like she knew it was time. Something passed between me and Sarah, then something that didn't need language. A thread retying itself in midair. She smiled through a rush of tears, crawled to her daughter, kissed the top of her head. "Your Nana loves you more than the whole sky," she whispered. And I did. And I do. After that, everything found a rhythm. I watched Grace twice a week while Sarah worked part-time. Miles and I, though never close, found a respectful quiet between us. We nodded when we passed, exchanged photos, shared glances that said, "We remember." That was enough. One afternoon in early May, Sarah stopped by with Grace after a checkup. The baby had fallen asleep in her car seat, her face pink from the sun, her fist still clutching the ribbon from the pediatrician's sticker. Sarah and I sat on the porch with cold tea and bare feet. She looked older lately, not in a tired way, in a settled way. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and said, "Do you ever wish things had happened differently?" It wasn't the first time she'd asked. But it felt different now. Softer. "I wish you hadn't hurt me like that," I said, not with resentment, just truth. "But I don't wish away who I've become because of it." She nodded slowly, eyes still closed. Sometimes I replay it. That day, I see myself standing there in my dress. I thought I looked like someone important, someone finally untouchable. You were beautiful. I was cruel. I didn't say anything. The wind did. She opened her eyes and looked at me. "You never yelled. You just left. You told me to." I didn't mean it. I know that now. But I didn't then. A long silence stretched between us. Grace stirred in her seat. We both turned toward her at the same time, instinctively, as if choreographed. And I realized then this is what we had been moving toward all along. Not erasure, not restoration, but something new. I think I was angry with you for being everything she said, for being so present, so dependable. I wanted to stand on my own, and I didn't know how to do it without pushing you away. I nodded. "And I let you." "Why?" "Because if I'd fought harder, I would have lost you completely. You needed space. I needed air. And we both had to break to find our shape again." She reached for my hand, held it. We sat like that until the sun dipped low behind the neighbor's trees and turned everything gold. Eventually, Sarah lifted Grace out of her seat. The baby blinked up at me, her fingers wrapping around mine. We watched the wind move through the garden, the petals of my roses flickering like they were listening. "You know, Sarah said, cradling Grace against her chest, I used to think I'd never be like you. And now I hope I'm even half of who you are." I didn't answer, just pressed a kiss to Grace's forehead and let the stillness speak for us. When they left, I stood at the window and watched their car disappear down the street. The sky was soft with the promise of evening. The porch still held the shape of where she'd sat. And I felt more than ever that I had arrived in a version of my life I hadn't planned for but had somehow earned. Not by being perfect, not by being needed, but by enduring, by choosing dignity over fury, by allowing the broken things to stay broken until they didn't hurt anymore. The wedding still happened. The locket still sits in a drawer. There's no undoing it, no rewriting it. But now when I think of that day, I don't feel humiliation anymore. I feel distance. I feel the space between then and now, and I bless it, because it gave me back something more important than her wedding day. It gave me myself. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better. Harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.